Guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, HOA Sued Me for Fighting Discrimination Against Disabled People. I fought back and won. My life almost ended 5 years ago when I was in a terrible motorcycle accident. My back and pelvis were broken, among plenty of other injuries, and it took me almost 2 years to recover from it. I have remained mostly wheelchair-bound, but I continue to work in physical therapy to walk again. My wife, Anna, and I decided to move to a home that had a larger open floor plan and was located somewhere beautiful and close to physical therapy, which prior to moving, was almost an hour away. I know. Why would I go there if it's so far away? Well, they have therapists that specialize in rehabbing individuals who are partially paralyzed and have immense success. This was my best chance at walking again, and I wanted to make it faster and easier for Anna to get me there. We found an incredible home that overlooks a truly beautiful lake with a spacious park next door. Boy, is it a sight to see with all of its mature and lovely trees and hills in the background. I would say it's nothing less than breathtaking in the fall when the leaves change. The property is honestly such a lucky find. It had barely been on the market when we snagged it. When we purchased the home, we knew that there was a homeowners association and we agreed to it. I liked the idea of having the surrounding homes look nice and kept well because we came from an area that had a lot of less attractive properties and old cars parked everywhere. We just wanted something new and different too. I was somewhat excited to go to HOA meetings, as I was feeling kind of curious and wanted to see what it was all about. I discovered that there were 4 members on this HOA board, and they held it not far from my home at the public neighborhood park that was next to my house. When I say, next to my house, it was still kind of far away, especially for a guy in a wheelchair. It was simply not possible for me to wheel myself or have my wife push me across the bumpy and awkward terrain. The first meeting was a pain and felt kind of demeaning. The 4 board members liked to sit at a park bench under a large maple tree. A few others came to attend besides the members and myself, and they brought their own chairs or squeezed onto the bench. This particular bench was located about 30 feet from any parking spots, and when I told Anna to drive onto the grass to be closer to the bench, an angry lady very quickly told me I couldn't park there. When I told her that I couldn't get myself in my wheelchair over there, she said that I could listen from my vehicle in the nearest parking space. I don't know about you guys, but I don't have some crazy superpower where I can hear conversations from 30 feet away. We tried our best to hear, but it was just not going to happen. Anna went to ask one of the people if they minded giving us their phone number so we could call and listen in to the conversation, and one gentleman nicely gave us his number. We were able to listen in to the rest of the conversation, but it just felt like a few of them were being short and kept asking if we could hear every few minutes in a condescending tone. Once I realized the meeting was coming to a close, I piped up that I would be happy to hold the next HOA meeting at our house. We have plenty of room and it was right there anyway, and I would supply drinks and snacks as well. The same woman quickly shot the idea down and said that they had had it in the same place for years and she wasn't going to change it now. I went to the next meeting and called the same number again. I again asked about switching locations. Maybe to somewhere more accessible for wheelchairs. Instead, one of the male board members said that we could try and carry me over to the bench. To me, that is such an embarrassing suggestion. I immediately declined it and decided to listen in like last time. I was growing impatient with this treatment, and the next month's meeting is truly what pushed me over the edge of anger and frustration. This time the meeting had been rained out and they had to move it to the rude woman's house. I learned that her name was Lori and that she was actually the chairman of the board. She had a huge set of stairs that led to her house, and there was no feasible way for me to get inside. I once again had to listen by phone, and this time I was fed up and left before the meeting was over. Humiliated and angry, I called a lawyer and started the process of suing the crap out of these jerks. It took me a few days to gather some quotes and prepare everything for the attorney that I chose. We worked up a case against them, saying that they were violating the state's Fair Housing Act, which stated that meetings must be open to all HOA members. I was unsure if that meant that it had to be accessible to everyone though. You know how wording can mean everything with the law. In those few days, I received a visitor at my door. His name was Alan and I recognized him from the meetings. Turns out that Alan was upset with my treatment at these HOA meetings and spoke up to Lori about it. She swiftly had him removed from the board and replaced by a friend of hers. He said that he never understood why Lori and some of the others wanted to exclude me so badly and apologized for being involved in my mistreatment. We managed to get an emergency injunction held and the next meeting was at a clubhouse we rented out and was wheelchair accessible. Lori was clearly pretty PO'd the whole time and didn't have much to say but kept the sour expression on her face. Our case wasn't over yet though. We still were waiting for the court date, which finally arrived after several more months. Turns out that the HOA board decided they were going to counter-sue me and wanted $20,000 for any legal fees they've incurred. It was awkward in the courtroom as we waited for the judge to arrive. They were an older gentleman who, if I had to guess, had plenty of experience in his craft. Both sides explained their cases and afterwards he asked his own questions. He asked Lori why she wasn't willing to make these meetings accessible to someone in a wheelchair. She said some crap about there being limited options and that this was the routine for years. She claimed she offered solutions but that I was completely unreasonable. What? Because I didn't want you guys carrying me across the park? The judge's consideration was short. He started off by saying that this was the first time he'd had an issue with an HOA and someone with a disability like mine. He actually joked that he avoided cases with homeowners associations but decided to pick this one up because of me. He said that under the Americans with Disabilities Act of our state, that they are legally obligated to hold their meetings at a location accessible to everyone. He ordered that the HOA pay me what I asked for, plus more. They wanted $20,000 from us, which he dismissed, turning around and awarding me the money instead. The feeling was wonderful and so satisfying. I couldn't believe it. Lori was stuttering at one point and even tried to argue with the judge, who was not shy about telling her that she was the most wrong in the situation here today. Apparently our hero at his desk had a son who was paralyzed in a car accident when a drunk driver hit him. He said that this was the least he could do for people that were being mistreated by others because of a disability. Lori was fuming. She stormed out of the room and withdrew herself from the HOA board after that day. She did stay in the neighborhood and could be seen tending to her yard sometimes but for the most part kept to herself. Alan and I became fast friends and I now enjoy attending the HOA meetings at a wheelchair-accessible location that no one has a single complaint about, my house. The next story is titled, Kept Up with the Joneses. So, I just remembered this story from when I was younger, and I hope this fits. It's short but still satisfying for me to this day. Alright, so when I was little, about 6 or so, some new people moved in next door to my family. We lived in a little section of town that was all identical duplexes. They moved to the house next to us. They had 2 kids, one my age and one a year older. Those kids were horrors. The younger boy would regularly break my little brother's, 2.5 years younger, toys or throw things on our roof like our super soakers and sports equipment. Our roofs were really flat, so once something got up there, they would stay up there forever unless we could convince a parent to go get a ladder. You see, we didn't have a lot of money, so when we got these things it was a big deal, but they had everything that was cool and new in the world and didn't care. Now, their parents and my parents were friends. They would all set their chairs out in the front yard and chat or play cards inside, which left my brother and I at the mercy of the neighbor kids who didn't want us to play with their things. After a couple years, my parents started noticing that whenever they made a very calculated decision for our family or household, the neighbors had to try and one-up us. My dad wanted to get a hunting dog. They got 2 little dogs. My mom wanted a garden. They built a bigger one. Dad put up a short chain link fence to keep the dog in, so they put up an 8-foot wood privacy fence and painted it red. Then, when my parents would talk about an idea for something they were considering, they would do it first. My bro got a Nintendo 64 for Xmas, but the neighbors got their kid a Sega and let him open it 2 weeks early so he'd get his system first. This went on for a few more years. Dad turned the entryway walls into shelves. They tore theirs out and built hardwood ones. I got a cat from my grandmother for my birthday. They got 2 cats. And the younger one kept breaking things. Kicking my brother's remote control car until the gears stripped and it never worked again. Ripped the arms off his Stretch Armstrong doll. But as we got older, his games became more mature. He started wanting to play games with privates. They had a pool and would often want us to play games that required ducking heads under the water and pulling down bathing suit bottoms. Now, I don't remember exactly what prompted me to tell my mom about it. We would have done whatever they wanted so we could play with their bigger, better, more awesome toys. I think the boy suggested he was going to get us in trouble or something, I don't know. But I told my mom. She, rightfully, lost her shit at the neighbor's mom. Their friendship started falling apart then. At one point I did something rather benign and annoying that's typical for children, and the neighbor mom threatened to beat me with a broom. My parents were done. This is where the revenge comes in. It was so simple, so smooth, and so easy. All my parents had to do was make one little comment about an idea they were considering and let the neighbors take care of the problem on their own. They told them they were thinking of moving. So, the neighbors, in a rush to move first, ended up on the other side of the town in a house almost 150 square feet smaller than the duplex. Never heard from them again outside of school until Facebook and got the update that the older sister got pregnant in high school. The parents divorced and the boy ended up in juvie for trying to kill his dad. What a mess. The last story is titled, "You Burn My Dog, I Burn You." I live in a neighborhood where the only thing separating the yards are chain link fences. My neighbor's late 20s nephew just moved in with him. He's a smoker. I don't care. I smoked for years. As long as it's not on my property, then whatever you do is your business. Our dog, huge goofy goldendoodle named Cozy, spends most of the day outdoors. It's warm all year round where we live, so we have a pet door for him to go out during the day. Our yard is well fenced, with physical chain link and an invisible electric fence. So when Cozy started feeling sick, we didn't know what it could be. We don't have any weird plants growing in the yard that could have gotten him. And he stopped eating his dog food or drinking water. So, we went to the vet, who quickly diagnosed him with tobacco poisoning and discovered burns on the inside of his mouth. Since we aren't smokers and we hadn't had any recent guests who were, we had no idea where he would have gotten tobacco poisoning. My wife was sure I'd taken it up again and was lying to her. Quitting was an ugly, years-long process. I don't blame her at all. We had a big fight. I made it my mission to discover the source of the cigarettes to get back into my wife's good graces. At this point I'd assumed the cigarettes he got into were a one-time thing. I tore apart the house looking for an errant pack I might have left lying around in the dog's reach, still not sure how it would explain the burns though. I went over every inch of the fence looking for holes or weak spots where he might have been going for romps around the neighborhood. But just one day after he was treated at the vet and we'd cleared his play areas as safe, he got even sicker. I decided I would just put surveillance cameras up in the yard and the living room and limit his access to those two places during the day. Best case scenario, we'd get the answer, but worst case, at least we'd know they were in the house. We have the cameras up for just one day and Cozy gets so sick he has to spend the night in the hospital. I was heartbroken we'd allowed him to be in this situation. I sat up all night combing over every inch of the surveillance tapes, and that's when I saw it. The neighbor's nephew was coming out for a smoke every couple hours and throwing the butts over our fence where Cozy would promptly shoot over to eat them. And the nephew saw my dog eating his cigarette butts and did nothing, didn't try to stop him, and kept coming back every day multiple times a day. He wouldn't even finish the cigarette half the time. He'd take a drag or two then flick it over the fence. I think from the looks of the video his aunt and uncle didn't want him to be smoking, so he ditched the cig if he heard them coming. Cozy, God bless him, is not the brightest dog there ever was. Blindly trusting and unexceptionally loving, he couldn't fathom that a human would do anything to intentionally hurt him. It was heartbreaking to see him run out and gobble up the cigarette butts even after he yelped in pain from getting his mouth burned. I went over right when I saw this in the video, even though it was 10:30 at night, and pounded on the door. My neighbor answered and I explained the situation as calmly as I could. I said if he needed somewhere to put his butts I'd rig something up, sandcan or whatever, for him. My neighbor apologized and said this is totally unlike his nephew and called him down and said, "Why are you flicking cigarette butts into the neighbor's yard? You got their dog sick." And he denied it, basically saying in much more vulgar terms, "I don't smoke. I don't flick cigarettes into their yard." Neighbor immediately backed him up. I said I have surveillance footage, and neighbor said he'd be suing me for filming his yard without consent and how dare I make up stories about his nephew, and slammed the door. I think he should have considered himself lucky I wasn't there to collect on the vet bills. I didn't have time for small claims court or otherwise waiting. I filed a police report for littering on my property, but the police apologetically said there's not much they can do. I didn't have time for small claims court, and it wouldn't really solve my problem. Since I didn't want money, I just wanted him to stop. I considered just building a bigger fence, but there's a whole HOA thing about fences and it likely wouldn't get built for a few weeks minimum. So, desperate, I went out and bought a can of gas. I walked past my security cameras holding a lot of stuff from my car. Briefcase, sweatshirt, flat of bottled waters. And just as I was passing the area the cigarette butts land, I tripped. In my struggle to keep the gas can from falling, it accidentally made a big puddle in the grass. So, I did the responsible thing and I marked off the perimeter where the gas spilled with caution tape and traffic cones. And because of the gas puddle, I just took my dog with me to work for the day rather than risk his getting into it. Sure enough, within a few hours, the nephew came out for a smoke. Tossed his butt right into the area that I'd accidentally spilled gas that morning. And in an already arid climate, now soaked with gas, it lit up like he'd flipped a switch. Being the responsible citizen the nephew was, did he call 911? Did he try to put out the fire? Did he call me? No. He walked away. It just so happens that the gas puddle lead up to my old shed that I'd been planning to take down. But only I knew that I'd been planning to take it down. So, there's no reason I wouldn't be devastated when it was severely damaged by fire. A good Samaritan passing by called the fire department when she saw the flames. And when my wife got home over her lunch break to check on Cozy, she was genuinely shocked to find out a quarter of our lawn was torched and our shed irredeemably destroyed. And she told the firefighters as much. And offered them our security tapes. Our cameras weren't visually obvious, so I think the neighbor assumed I was bluffing about them. Negligent arson is a felony. The nephew littered, ignoring a giant dark stain in the ground surrounded by traffic cones and caution tape. He damaged my property and his aunt and uncle's. He had prior charges. Don't know for what. But it made his felony conviction that much worse. His aunt and uncle kicked him out because he'd promised them he wouldn't smoke at their place anymore and now had lied to them and burned a big portion of their yard. I told them since I has no plans to rebuild the shed I'd accept the cost of the vet bills rather than the price of a new shed, half as much as they'd otherwise be on the hook for. And they agreed without argument, neighbor and neighbor wife apologizing again and again for our property damage. Don't know what happened to nephew, since he was exiled, but I'll bet leaving the scene like that has to up the ante on him. And his aunt and uncle now have to pay big money to re-landscape their burned-up property. The flames licked some of their garage. And all but decimated an old tree on their property they've since had removed. All that matters is now Cozy can play in his yard without getting burned or poisoned. Thank you for listening.